take a look behind the scenes of our hard-hitting matchup versus the undefeated Copperhead, and find out why we had to scramble to make changes to Witch Doctor after this win. I'm Andrea Lately from Team Witch Doctor on BattleBots, and I'm going to show you everything that happened after the cameras turned away from this matchup. Let's start with a recap of the fight. As a larger diameter vertical spinner, we're inherently at a disadvantage when we battle small drum spinners like Copperhead. In a weapon-to-weapon engagement, their smaller drum engages under our larger disc, and they tend to hit us up, while we mostly hit them back at that low point in our rotation. The smaller diameter drum also tends to have a much higher RPM for the same tip speed, so their truth comes around a lot more often than ours, making it more likely that they will hit us before we can hit them. We've seen these physics in play in many matchups over the years, so this was in the front of our minds as we headed into this battle. In our pre-fight interview, you can hear Mike say that he's going to try to avoid weapon-to-weapon hits. Of course, no battle plan survives battle, especially when Copperhead's strategy is to go weapon-to-weapon as often as possible. The first hit of the match is a brutal weapon-to-weapon impact. As expected, Copperhead comes ahead in that first exchange, throwing Witch Doctor into a perfect backflip across the arena, crushing their adorable mini-bots. It's worth noting here that Witch Doctor's perfect landing wasn't just a bit of luck. In fact, you may have noticed throughout the season that Witch Doctor is doing a lot better job of staying right side up in general. As Bot Whisperer Pete mentioned in a previous episode, we made the new Witch Doctor 3 inches longer this season, and went through a lot of effort to design our center of mass to be as far back as possible. We believe this played a huge role in sticking that landing. Mike lines up for another hit, and this time we catch Copperhead before the weapon is up to full speed. This gives us a tip speed advantage that we need to flip Copperhead. We then engage again in another weapon-to-weapon hit while they're still upside down. When they're upside down, Copperhead's weapon spins down, while ours is spinning up, and both robots saw twice the impact on their bots that they would normally see. As you would expect, both robots took damage from this exchange of massive energy. Witch Doctor is able to land the next couple of hits, although it's evident to us, especially watching it on TV, that our weapon is no longer at 100%. Copperhead loses drive, and I spin down the weapon partway through the countdown to make sure we don't smoke our weapon motors. You can also see Witch Doctor start to vibrate a little bit towards the end of the match. This is because her teeth received a lot of damage and unbalanced our weapon as a result of those massive impacts with Copperhead. Witch Doctor moves on to the final 8 with a knockout victory over Copperhead. I'll let Robert talk to what went wrong with Copperhead on his YouTube channel's recap, but at the time, we thought this hit to the back of Copperhead bent the rear armor into their drive switch. So what happened to our weapon? And is it something that we can prevent from happening again over the remaining fights, which promise to hit just as hard? Throughout the season, we've been having a recurring issue with our frames mid-rail after big hits. In fact, we had gone through all our spare mid-rails at this point, and we called our sponsor, Kalamazoo Waterjet, and asked them to cut us a few more. We received them the next day, and got on the queue at the hospital to have them drill and tap the part so that it would be ready for use. But the bigger question is, why was this part bending? One big change we made to Witch Doctor this season was to the weapon motor system. In the past, we've mounted our weapon motors high enough in the bot to allow for a direct belt drive from the motor to the weapon. This leaves the weapon motors very close to our rib armor, and they have been damaged on a few occasions. This season, we decided to mount the motors as low as possible inside the robot, which required the addition of an intermediate shaft to drive the weapon. Perhaps more importantly, this change allowed us more flexibility of our weapon pulley placement, and we were able to place our weapon belts on the outside of our weapon discs instead of in between our weapon discs. You might remember that we lost belts last season to robots like Sawblaze and Kraken, so this was a needed change. But every change has a compromise, right? Having our belts on the outside of the weapon discs meant that the mid-rail needed a wider cutout to provide clearance for the belts, and the resulting mid-rail design was just a bit too weak for those bigger impacts. So how could we fix this halfway through the tournament? Our first problem with the bent mid-rail is that our weapon motors were mounted to the mid-rail that was bending. While the bent mid-rail itself isn't that big of a problem, bent weapon motors result in cracked magnets and jammed motors. We were going through weapon motors almost every fight, and we had to reach out to our sponsor Mag Motor for some emergency replacements. Part of our team got to work battle hardening the new batch of motors, while the rest of us looked for a solution to prevent this recurring bending issue with the mid-rail. The most obvious fix was to decouple the weapon motors from the midrail, to allow the midrail to bend without affecting the motors. This required a redesign of our rear weapon motor mounts, and new parts had to be made, but the hospital hadn't even been able to get our midrails machined yet. Adding another part to their queue didn't have a high chance of getting machined in time for our next match. Luckily, our sponsor Mastercam was visiting us in the BattleBots pit. What better way to give them the full BattleBots experience than to put them to work on the robot? Our team agreed on a new design, Mike made the changes on our SolidWorks CAD model, and Chad from Mastercam got to work programming the part for the Tormach milling machine that was on site for builder use. Maddie from Hijinks gave Chad a quick overview of this particular machine, and Chad put in a late night getting the new parts machined. Welcome to BattleBots, Chad! While we couldn't make the notch in our midrail any smaller, we decided to try to stiffen the midrail by adding an additional mounting point to our existing weapon module. This hopefully would support the center of the midrail and share the loads better. The hospital finished our midrail just in time, and our team got to work reassembling all these parts before our next match. I can't say enough how motivated and capable our teammates have been in times like these. When we're all beyond exhausted and facing daunting hurdles, they all step up and push to move mountains, all while making the entire experience such a blast. Paul, Rick, Chris, Andrew, Curtis, Kat, and Steve continue to be the voodoo magic that powers Witch Doctor. You likely won't notice any of these changes on TV, but we're hoping it makes all the difference in our next fight. We couldn't have done it without the sponsors that jumped in to help us make these emergency repairs. Mastercam, Kalamazoo Waterjet, and Mag Motor went above and beyond to get us back in the battle box in even better shape than before. Our top 8 fight against Minotaur promises to be our hardest hitting fight yet. Did you see them take down the champ endgame? That is a tough act to follow, but we're ready to get back in the battle box for the final episode of the season. Thanks for watching.